we are live. Jack,
Awesome. Logan,
good to see you again.
good to see you.
Our last conversation recorded was the origin story. That was
Yes,
a blast.
it
That was a
was.
trip down memory lane.
Indeed. Indeed. It's always fun to retell that story, reshare that story. I feel like oftentimes when we do, we kind of remind each other of some moments that happened along the way that, uh, easy to forget about a lot of it for sure. But
It filled in some missing pieces that I had forgotten about, and it was nice to get an expanded perspective. You fall over time when you're remembering the origin story of a business or phases in your career that you've done alongside of a co-founder, you remember your point of view. But hearing it from your colleague's point of view, it brings a level of richness and expansion to the moment, those key moments that we covered that really appreciated.
definitely, I mean, obviously, just different people, but also different roles along the way, so looking at things through a different lens, right? Even operationally rather than, just the experience. So
True.
always cool to do.
Now, in my mind, we're picking up the flag where we left off last time. At least we'll do our very best to bridge into our current state, the way we see business, the way we see defining a business and building a business.
Definitely, yeah. I know towards the last one, not only did we get to current state, we actually started
That's
getting into
right.
the future there for a little bit at the end. So, yeah, I'd love to jump back into that. Yeah, and I think we can show some people some stuff along the way as well. So that'll be fun.
Right on. We are show and tell. We do
Yes.
show and tell for a living, so it's nice to weave that in. Oftentimes I feel like the talking head thing is not doing us total justice since the
Yes,
visual architecture is so core to who we are as a team and what we do for our clients.
indeed. And, we're also doing stuff that not many people know about and in a way that not many people have done before. So sometimes the words, like you said, just don't do it justice. So, yeah.
I'm wondering if we pivot into this in the same way we have been on these strategy sessions, which
Okay.
is reveal the board only after the stage has been set and the base logic has been defined.
I, I love that.
Right
Yeah,
on.
I mean, even if we want to pull up like a blank board, or at least just go somewhere, a clean whiteboard space, and we can, organically kind of draw some stuff out, sketch some stuff out. Um, yeah, recently we did an exercise with our team where we kind of did our own interpretations of the venture map, our product here, and it was really interesting to see the different ways that we all kind of described or represented it, whether it be visually, you know, description wise, or like functionally, like tiered. So I think even doing something like that could be interesting, or even just bringing up that example that we recently did.
Okay, so I've got us pulled into a blank board here. Actually, this is where we did that exercise last time, but I say we start from scratch.
Yeah,
We justify our current perspective um, based on the work that we've done over the years, the exploration.
that sounds good.
So when you think about the various components of a business, I think it's easy to just kind of cast an array of points. And quick ones: sales, marketing, funnels, advertising, staff, say onboarding, processes, strategy, legal, finance, HR. I mean, the list, I like how you brought acquisition in there. It's like there's not just a many different components, but there's different levels of elevation.
Exactly, right. When you even lay stuff out on the table, I mean, immediately it's like, oh, well, before that, there's this, and after that,
Right.
there's this. Well, we also need to mention this if we're going to mention this. So, It can easily, become a very long list, even if you're just trying to plot out the key points, right, or key domains.
This is the classic question.
Yeah, this is the test, right? You know who's an entrepreneur, right?
Yeah.
I think I can go ahead and answer this one. Everything, quite literally.
All of it. The scary thing for this exercise is like, okay, like a lot of these are defined, but there's undefined nodes, there's undefined boxes, and that's the more scary part, because I love what we've referenced a lot is what Alan Dibb says in the one-page marketing plan, which is what you don't know in business will hurt you.
Yeah.
And you think, okay, great, we just did a 10-second sprint. We could probably spend more time talking about levels of elevation and things that are nested within one another, but this is a pretty decent, like, rapid swath of details. There of like elements to business, but there's unknown variables that even if we spend an hour or a day or weeks or years, there's always going to be things that we don't fully understand. There's unknown variables. And but the scary thing is those unknowns will hurt you, because whether you know it or not, you're responsible for them.
Well said.
And I think this idea, like this headspace, was the catalyst for what we started doing in 2020, in the beginning of the year, when we said, we're tired of a bloated Google Drive and like email and whatever else we were using to track stuff. It just was fragmented, it was disparate, and it was hard to see the whole picture.
Yes.
I love the mental image, Jack, of like Nostradamus or somebody like that, like Galileo trying to map out the stars. And, you imagine this dude with a telescope and a white beard, and he's like desperately trying to like track these disparate constellations and infer patterns and track all of that. But it's like before they're on paper, the patterns are really just in abstract form in their minds, right? The Big
Right.
Dipper or Orion's belt, it's like you're trying to infer that. And it's in this foggy headspace that the constellation only exists in an implicit capacity.
Right.
I feel like it's very much the same for a lot of entrepreneurs. Like you could speak with almost any business owner about sales or marketing and how they connect in their minds. And they may even be able to show you a physical manifestation of that connection, like automations, CRM, SOPs. There may be literal ways for those things to connect. But the more you have that conversation and the more nodes or elements or stars you bring into that constellation, the less and less their material integrations are present. It's like if you are having a conversation about how advertising and marketing and sales and funnels, processes, staff, legal, onboarding, recruitment, strategy, finance, if you're having a conversation of how all of those things are connected in reality, how it's all integrated into a tapestry, into a harmony, and things that are all working together cohesively to keep your business running, they can't show you how that happens. They have in one place. They have to show you in a dozen different places, and the end points are often frayed. It's not obvious how one thing feeds into the other.
Right. The connecting pieces are often missing, right? It's here, okay, now we're going to talk about this, and then we'll talk about this. And they do lead into each other. Right. And then that's just left kind of implicit, right? So
it's left to the background processing for your brain CPU. You have to,
yeah.
just to show up, to make decisions and to execute, on things in the business, you have to show up with a level of implicit understanding, with a level of shared, like common ground with the team, or even if you're a solopreneur with just yourself, you have to have a concept of how all of this is connected and feeding itself. So that background processing is like having 1,000 apps open on your computer just to then run the main app, just to then open like a intensive workflow. Like 80% of your CPU is running on stuff in the background.
It's true.
Tim Ferriss says, he talks about decision-making fatigue. That's why a lot of the entrepreneurial community talks about reducing the amount of decisions you have to make, so you're making fewer but higher impact decisions. And when I think about keeping in mind how a lot of these elements in a business are connected and input and output into one another, I think that's kind of like this may be overstating it, but it's kind of like a junk processing. It's at the very least, it's a low quality headspace, because it's not directly making decisions. It's not directly making an impact and moving the needle, like doing stuff, executing and developing. It's just the table stakes to show up and play the game.
Right.
So I think one thing that's been very attractive for in my mind and for our work over the years is to put all of this into an outward environment, into a place that we don't have to rely on our brains that are oftentimes under-caffeinated or pulled in many different areas or falling victim to reactivity. It's a place that is like a source of truth. And not in a cliche way, but like a legitimate digital twin of the entire business. So we can both say, this is our shared understanding, and we can point to that thing tangibly.
100%. Yeah. And I mean, beyond that, right, we're kind of talking ideation, I mean, for the sake of example and such, but I mean, beyond that, and maybe I'm getting a little bit too ahead of myself already, but, I think we also wanted a place, that was functional, right? Not just a representation, a picture or a digital twin for the sake of visuals, but for it to actually be useful and be something that we are working within, not just to work on it, but to that's actually functional and is contributing to running and managing the business.
Well said. Yeah, and not just another cloud storage place that made not just like a better looking place to store all the files, but an actual environment that facilitates real-time collaboration, asynchronous collaborations. It's a virtual workspace.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, illuminating insights as well, right? It's pretty amazing. You've got a good understanding of what's going on, like you said, in your head, right? But when it's on paper or in a whiteboard or and it's you're not leaving any details out. All of a sudden you realize, okay, you start to realize some things about your own business, right? That maybe you didn't realize, or a new idea will come to your mind and be like, oh, we should be doing this actually, or we should be doing it this way, right? Or why aren't we already doing it this way? Yeah. And I think a lot of people would probably be like, no, I know my business. I'm doing everything, optimally to the best of my ability. The only reason I'm not is because of, blockers or circumstance. But really, I mean, and I know we're talking at a high level now, so I don't want to go too deep, but, when you are representing, all these pieces, how they're connected at a, level of detail, when we start going down elevation, it really does help you in in your strategy, in the way that you're optimizing processes, and just understanding like where you are and where you're headed and where you need to be.
You're bringing to mind that thing we've discussed many times in client engagements on the benefits of having, for example, your acquisition and fulfillment mapped out and significant level of detail, because it's like there's this momentum that'll take place to it. We talk about heat mapping it, but it's so obvious when you see a hole in the experience, or you see this like glaring inefficiency and bottleneck, or everything up until a certain point is dialed in, and then after that there's like this gap. It's so obvious that when you can see it, in fitness we say what gets measured gets improved. But when you can, when you can see the hole in the machine of your business, there's a gravity that pulls you to solve that. It brings it to your attention.
Right. I mean, 100%, right? Like something could be working and it's fine. And if you didn't have eyes on it, you probably wouldn't even notice. But then when you see it, you're like, this is wholly inefficient. And, everything around it is done a certain way. Why aren't we doing it for this as well? Right. So I 100% agree. I love that analogy too. It's kind of measuring up the business, right? Taking measurements.
A quote that we have kind of lived and died by for years is Alexander Osterwilder's saying in the Business Model Generation. I think he talks about it in Testing Business Models, Testing Business Ideas, the book. And it's the primary job of an entrepreneur is to reduce risk and uncertainty. And I think you and I have a natural inclination towards risk mitigation.
Yes.
And I don't think we're averse. We're not risk averse, but we want to avoid unnecessary failure, and to a level of we're willing to invest energy and time into putting forethought into what we do, recognizing that that is a tricky domain, which can easily fall into over-analysis, paralysis, all of that type of stuff. But finding that threshold, that limit of advance on the risk mitigation stuff, where it's like, is this really well thought through? Are we just being cowboys and shooting from the hips and being reactive, or is this an intentional effort? And to that end, when we first started working together in 2019, there was a lot of lessons learned from some previous ventures that were unsuccessful. And I think we spent a good deal of time talking about that and recognizing we don't have unlimited resources. We can't just fail unlimited times until we make it. There's only a few rounds in the chamber, so to speak. So we got to get this right sooner than later.
Yeah, that fail hard and fast mentality is very circumstantial. That works for some people, but it's not feasible. I mean, you can do it, but it might be, I kind of blew my shot and now I'm out, right?
Right.
So, I mean, I think we're not, we never want to be obsessively averse to like risk and uncertainty, but I think we've always been very careful to at least be aware of risk and uncertainty, right? Aware of it. And yes, we'll do our best to mitigate, but then also, understand, okay, ways to pivot and assure ourselves that if something doesn't go as we're anticipating, it's not like a catastrophe, right?
You said it. I think this is a question we asked along those lines, and we still ask to this day. It's a guiding line of inquiry for our work. I'm going to bring up one of our, original VMs, and it's like, if we really don't want to fail, and to the point we were making a minute ago, it's like, if you don't have a massive savings account or a trust fund or a day job that will last you forever, if you're going all in on a startup, then there's a runway, and if you're trying to bootstrap it and not raise outside capital, you will have there's a limited amount of time where your financial wherewithal can keep you basically doing it before it's a hobby. And you're gonna, because the bill collectors are always gonna come if you can't get income sourced through the venture. It becomes a hobby. So I think to that line of thinking of reducing risk and uncertainty being the primary job of a startup entrepreneur, one thing we asked ourselves from the very early days is, well, what are the elements of a business and how do we do them with excellence? How can we not reinvent the wheel here? You know, if the obvious elements are some of these notes we mentioned earlier, it's like a lot of the stuff we had no experience in. It's like, how do we not try to like make up all this stuff randomly on our own? How can we skip to the front of the line, stand on the shoulders of titans, and take all of the wisdom and best practice and like cutting edge strategy from decades of that discipline or industry of school of thought and like implement that into the overall thing in the shortest possible time?
Yeah.
So that was my belief, Jack, is like that's the summary. That's really what started us trying to map all of this out. And the first thing that it kind of got to, jump on to follow with me for a moment.
Yeah.
You know, we went through the Innovation Core program at Tech Runway, and they are big fans of the business model canvas. And I remember it's like, it's an awesome tool, but afterwards you're kind of like, now what?
Right.
And if you do any research, you know, even beyond the program, you find out, oh yeah, well, there's another thing you can do that's really recommended. But also, and then it's like, okay, well, you learn that. Again, this is a book, this is a course, this is like its own thing. But then you're like, well, there's more to this. So, but before you even go further, you should go backwards and conduct an environment scan. And there's 4 areas of an environment that inform your business model. So then all of a sudden you're doing tons of work on the environment, and then that's adjusting the internal model based on insights from the environment. Then that's adjusting this deliverable. And it's like, then you go down and it's like, well, now I have a model and an environment, but I'm trying to do stuff with that. So you have to assess risk, and then you have to more clearly define, like, this is the go-to-market stuff, define who our potential customers are and how we're telling the story of our business to those customers, and like the marketing plan and the offer and lead generators and how we're fulfilling on our services and how we're like straight up building the pages to represent all of that. It's like this crazy rabbit hole that you go down, and then it's like, oh, well, you can do all of that in an evidence-based way where you're tracking your hypotheses across variable domains of risk, and you're identifying the most critical assumptions with the least amount of evidence, and you're developing a testing sequence to verify those things. So it's like we were in that headspace, and all of a sudden having like this array of data points and Google Drive and Dropbox and stuff like that. So I think just putting them into a virtual environment like Miro, where you can just kind of spread them all out on a virtual table, was a huge advantage and breakthrough for us.
Definitely agree. And, you know, I'm sure that, you know, there are some people like listening to this or watching would be like, you know, that's a very, very structured approach, right? Because even what we just talked about right here, just laying out all these deliverables, right? I mean, like back to what you're talking about, right? These two come from, you know, a similar space, right? The stuff down below also comes from a similar space. But, you know, even in just kind of doing this walk through these deliverables, that's kind of us stringing them together, right? And I think that does speak a little bit about us as people being very, you know, structure based, logic oriented, and wanting to find those connecting pieces and saying, okay, you know, we've got a dozen different sources saying, hey, this is the place where you start, and then you move on to this, but I'm not going to tell you that part. Right. So to us, we had to determine and say, okay, well, what really makes the sense as like the starting place? And then, you know, from there, how do we branch out and evolve each of like the different domains of the business in the different directions, right? Like you said, moving into like, okay, defining customer segments and then how we speak to them, and then the vehicle through which that message is presented. And then on the other side, right, going into, backing out into the environment, doing testing and being evidence-based. And then beyond that, moving into strategy as well, right? So here I'm jumping back on the follow here. I'm loving seeing these old boards.
I thought you would appreciate this. I think that's probably relevant to go into the growth
Yeah.
plan as well. I think that's a natural place to go. I just wanted to reference some of these older boards, specifically like the incubation framework. And that was how we started stockpiling our notes, because to your point, it's like Strategizer makes the business model canvas, the environment map, the value proposition canvas,
Right.
assumptions, hypotheses, experimentation sequences. So like you can have a lineup of those deliverables, but then you're missing the story, the offer, the lead generators, the funnel, the marketing plan. You're missing a lot of that stuff.
Right.
And then it's like then you don't have the brand guidelines for style. Then, I mean, there's a lot of an array of things that are missing. So we just started crushing books and courses
Yeah.
and like trying to map out how to produce these deliverables in step-by-step formats. So in a quick manner, we could have best practice business models, all of that stuff, including strategy. Which from our perspective, if you have a internal model, your business model, and you have your external environment, then your growth plan or your forward trajectory is measured across multiple levels on a time horizon or planning horizon, all the way to the point that's the farthest extent of that, which would be your vision or the overall mission or the BHAG, the big, hairy, audacious goal. So there's a point where it leaves a finite planning stage and turns into more of an abstract objective on the horizon line.
Right. Right.
I digress, but this is how it began. This is our first board. It's just a collection of processes. And we always said in those days, and we sold this. We could have, we always say we could have just stayed in selling this service. That was a 4-month project. That
Right. Basically just walking people through our own process documented, approach to mapping this stuff out. Right. And of course, at the end of this, immensely valuable, but a small piece of what we're doing now. Right.
Huge.
Small.
Very, very small.
Yeah, but I think that it is the onset of the methodology as well, right? The keep documenting everything to potentially reuse, run through with different scenarios, or if we need to modify something, right? Always having it like in the back pocket, like represented, like how it's done, not only the end result. And then I love this one down here because this really is just kind of like, if you squint your eyes and look at the venture map in its current state, this is where, the core like concept of what we were initially trying to map out was, right. And it really was, this combination between, I think this might have even been before we dove into kind of like service blueprinting or anything like that.
Yeah. I don't even think we knew that service blueprinting was a thing back then.
Right. So we wanted to map out our funnel from traffic channels to conversion, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then our actual fulfillment, service delivery. And then we're like, okay, before that, yeah, we got to produce content for the traffic channels and, what fuels our content and the materials that are, market facing, customer facing, strategy, our story, sales process, and our solution, right? You could drag and drop these, right? Strategy would probably stay over here, but yeah, it's always wild to come back and look at this because I think this is still solid, but it's not very functional. It's just kind of like a diagram, right?
Yeah. It's there is one that's not in here, but it has a shrunken down incubation framework into one piece of the venture map.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about.
That was
Yeah,
like the early fuel cell
yeah,
concept, where all those strategic deliverables are kind of the fuel cell for the rest of the business.
right. Baking the functionality into it. Yeah, yeah, as well as the context. Right.
Yeah.
Um,
And and I remember saying a lot in those days that all of the processes and all these strategic deliverables were an acorn to an oak tree. There's so much more to a business than just the the model and the environment scan and the strategy. There's tons more.
oh yeah.
And we went, you and I did a period of time, and I guess I don't want to do an origin story again, but there was like straight up 6 months or more where every day, all day, we went like down the rabbit hole on exploring that idea, hunting down how to do this thing.
Yeah,
It was by no means obvious.
certainly.
It was intense, and where we landed, I guess we're beating around the bush here to some extent, but we landed on a place where we are now, which is after great toil and trial and error. The highest level of categorization that we found was if all of the stuff in a business you could zoom up to the stratospheric level of elevation where everything else would be nested beneath it.
Hmm.
That would be business architecture.
Right. Like if we're talking, you keep zooming out, but there's no extra stuff coming. It's just getting smaller and smaller at that point. This is the top level. Right.
The continental level, like
Yeah.
as high up as you can go. We used to call this strategy.
Right. Yeah. And I think in explanation, it may be a little bit easier to grasp if we did use that terminology, but I think we both know it's not accurate, so we don't want to use it. Right.
Yeah,
Because strategy is a piece of this.
it
So
is. You're right. In defining the category as a whole, it seems more accessible to define it as strategy or even ideas. But what I'll say is there is a type of thing in business where it's like the planning to do the things, right? It's the
yes.
what's our marketing strategy, our branding, our business model, what's our sales process? It's like the collateral of the business, the assets and stuff that can all be kind of grouped together. And there's
Right.
very clearly defined subcategories in this zone.
Right. Yeah. Because
But
it's not just ideas; it's also like the reasoning for those ideas and the context and the evidence. Right. So it's the stuff that's on its own is I guess isn't really doing anything. Right. It's kind of static. It's informational. It's hypotheses and goals. Future oriented or past reasons and evidence, kind of.
you said it, my friend. But I think a really clean way to complement that is if you only had this stuff, you would be a hobbyist or an academic. It would just be an ivory tower exercise of philosophizing and of intellectual exploration.
All right, and you can think about it all day. You'd have the time.
Yeah, so it's like there is a certain point where we're defining what it is, what we're trying to do. We're planning it all, just like in the gym. If we're going to do a workout, we could sit and write the coolest workout routine in the world, but there's a moment where you have to cross the threshold and actually work out. You got to train, do the reps.
Right. You can
There's the
theorize about all the best fitness strategies, the best workout routines, and be sitting at home and still be out of shape. Right.
It's true. So there is this other piece, which is operations or execution,
The doing.
the doing of the things.
Yes.
And there's an awesome quote. I don't think I have it in this board, but it's Sun Tzu. And in the Art of War, he says that strategy without tactics is the slowest route to victory. Tactics without strategy is the noise before defeat.
So
You know, it brings it brings to mind that ivory tower thing we spoke about a moment ago. It's like, if you're only just planning, that is the slowest route. If you're only just doing, you imagine like Tasmanian devil entrepreneur who's just spinning around, reacting, and always trying to fight fires.
Yeah.
They're most likely going to have some success, but it leads to the inevitable burnout and failure because it's a long-term game in business.
100%. And you said something there. I just want to touch upon, strategy versus tactics. That was originally the names for either corner, right? Um, and it's definitely a piece of each. But we moved on to business architecture, encapsulating more than just strategy, and operations management, encapsulating more than just tactics. More so on the red side than the blue side. And then what you're doing right here, they're not two separate boxes, right? You're not doing one without the other. They're actually overlapped, and because there are pieces that kind of are that intersection between strategy and operations, especially when we're representing the business here in a sort of physical uh, way in this representation.
Well, that's very well said. And before we get into the overlap, I think it's important to say, I even had a meeting with an entrepreneur. He's a freelancer, a solopreneur, great guy, and he's awesome at doing his business, like rendering the services. And I was asking him about his business model and his strategy and how he does it. And he's like, yeah, I'm not at that place. I don't have any of that defined.
Yeah.
But even for a situation like that, Jack, it doesn't mean that there's no intent behind the actions.
Mm-hmm.
To use the gym analogy, even if you don't write down the workout, even if you just say, I'm going to make it up as I go, even if like the decision making cycle is very, very tight, right? I see a machine, I do it, I figure out the reps as I go. There is still the intent and the action combined. It's impossible to have the two separated, which I think is important. They are intrinsically overlapping.
Yeah, it's a sliding scale that you can't quite like break off and fully go into one, or else you don't have a business, right? Um,
Um, I added just a bit more context into the types of things that would be displayed in pure operations. The people, the weekly alignment, like using the EOS methodology for L10 meetings, and then fully decomposed and specified project plans across quarters.
right.
Now is probably the perfect time to get back to what you were saying a moment ago, which is the overlap. What is that space? And I know you have a description that's fantastic. I would catalyze that description by saying it's the reality of the business. It's where everything is.
It's actually in motion, right? At the end of the day, the point of the business is to provide customers with something in exchange for money, right? And that's the thing that's missing from either side here, right? Operationally, yes, that's involved in this. Strategy, yes, that's involved in this. And this is the place where we also bring in basically the main character, which is the customer, the person that is quite literally fueling the business.
It's non-obvious, at least it was to us several years ago, how to structure all of that. There's a lot of people that talk about funnels and marketing and driving traffic and sales, but finding like this a very clean way to structure what happens after that, and then even align all this stuff in the beginning, like how to put all of those components together in an integrated way that you could see. That took some time.
Certainly. And I think a lot of people, like you said, when people think about potentially visually representing it, people think of diagrams of a sales funnel, right, where it's basically just categorically, top to bottom, um, and then maybe something like a customer journey map, right, where there is a high level overview of what the customer is doing, right. But those are both pretty high elevation, and that terminology basically means it's not much detail to it, right? Not much to be gleaned from it other than, yes, this is what's happening.
Well, I think it's appropriate to talk a little bit about what, in my mind, was a breakthrough. Oops, initiatives for the brand experience space, and we were, like we were saying a minute ago, we were studying funnel design and all of that. We learned a couple categories that helped us here, such as Scott Galloway, when he talks about there's purchase, there's pre-purchase, purchase, and post-purchase. That was a really helpful distinction. So simple, but to hear him say that was very helpful. And I think over the years we've kind of fallen into aligning on the acquisition and fulfillment school of thought.
Right.
But even then, we still had to do some more work, because looking under that lens, if we say, okay, well, what's in a brand experience that's as close to universal as possible? There's a whole industry of customer lifecycle marketing, which I think has also really informed a lot of what we do. Fulfillment, and but I think a big mover here was service blueprinting, and you touched on that a little bit earlier, Jack. And
yeah, and I think just service design, doing a deep dive into that as a whole, was eye opening, and even referencing people like Joey Coleman, talking about the importance of like the human element throughout the service delivery, right? Having intentional touch points at different phases of the of your service, right? Um, so, I mean, I can see you already mapping it out right now. What we came to was, you know, traffic, top of funnel, basically being the first step, your website, landing pages, all that. Mid funnel, where you know, your presence has been known. They've seen your stuff through your traffic channels. They've even visited your page, but they haven't converted yet, right? That's where things like nurture sequences, where people are using your lead generators and engaging with your content. And then, of course, the actual place of conversion, sales. And then we actually broke apart fulfillment into quite a lot of pieces. Affirm being, from that Joey Coleman methodology, that touch point before they even start using your product or engaging in your service, that touch point of reassurance to surprise and delight them, as we like to say, and to get rid of that any sense of buyer's remorse, even if someone wouldn't admit that they have buyer's remorse. After every big purchase, we all subconsciously are thinking, should I have done
question.
that, right? Or doubling down and saying, oh, this is amazing, I'm so happy I did this, almost just trying to convince yourself, right? So, and then after that, activation, onboarding, either to your learning how to use your product, receiving your product, or into the service. Acclimation, this is where the majority of fulfillment takes place, actually. It's adjusting the process of engaging in receiving that value as a customer. And then accomplish the moment where they have received the value that they paid for, basically. And then after that, there's kind of the after piece, right? And that is adopt and advocate. And adopt is basically the phase where you're somebody's go-to, right? They, when they think about this problem, they think about you, right? We all have brands that we return to and say, yeah, this is where I get all my t-shirts, right? um, and then advocate, I mean, that is beyond putting a referral program in place. This is people going to their family members and saying, you have to do this, you have to buy this, you have to try this out, for no exchange. They're not getting anything in return. It's just, they are proudly saying, hey, I bought this, you should too. Right. I think that's the goal everybody wants to get to. Right. And of course, something to point out is that this is not a straight line, and it is not one line either. Right. There are loops and doubling back and, upsells and re-engaging. If somebody's adopting you as a brand, then they're going back into your mid funnel and being resold on other things. Right. And it gets very, very complicated, right? Especially if you want to represent multiple services, multiple products, multiple funnels, multiple traffic channels going through different routes and weaving that all together. But I mean, the end result, it proves so incredibly valuable.
Indeed.
It blows my mind that people don't do it.
That's the statement of the century, my friend. It's especially with tools like GPT and Miro and Notion, all of which you can use for free. There's one piece to the puzzle of levels of interaction, which I think that's a dimension to this that was difficult to reconcile and to think like, okay, we have top of funnel. We have a landing page, a campaign specific page. We've got a home page, whatever it is. What is the actual page is physical evidence. What the user is doing is straightforward, but what are we doing? And what are we doing at front stage, backstage, and what support processes are present? And my concern is that we're out of time, Jack. So I think what we need to do is plant the flag at service blueprinting and at experience. And in the next discussion, we get into, the actual map itself, and we show all over the place here. There we go. We actually, sorry about that. We actually start detailing how it is that this looks in the real world.
Absolutely.
And how we've done it.
Yeah, and I think that'll be a lot of fun, and definitely looking forward to a part 2.
Me too, man. It's amazing how fast time flies when we're
I know,
fun.
Seriously.
Thanks for hanging out and running through this with me.
Absolutely, man.
It's always a pleasure, Mark. Oh, and before we break, if you've watched this video all the way through till now and you're like, I like this, I want it for my business, the good news is you can have it. You can have it very easily. You don't need to go through half a decade of toil like Jack and I did to figure out how to put this thing together. We will give you our venture map template for Miro for free. All you have to do is tell us where to send it. If you're watching this on YouTube, there should be a link below that says something like get my free VM or something like that. Click that. Tell us where to send it. Boom. We'll send it to your inbox. We'll also give you some other resources like how to build it for free. If you end up wanting to connect with us on the line, we're happy to do some of the heavy lifting with you on a free strategy session to just kind of get you in the right direction and get your sort of foundational venture map built and launched. So that's our commitment to you, to build a community, to help entrepreneurs accelerate their learning and build momentum in the process. So we're out of time for now. Thank you for watching. And Jack, thank you for your partnership in this effort. You're the co-founder they will write books about someday.
Well, thank you, Matt. It was a lot of fun doing this and looking forward to the next one.
Me too, man.